Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the moderator of the next session, Susan Walton.
Hello and welcome to everyone turning up early on a Saturday morning. It's great to see that the room is actually so full, so thank you for coming. My name is Susan Walton, and don't let my funny accent fool you. I am American. I was born and raised there. I'm also a Briton. I've lived in the UK for the last 40 plus years, and I'm also half Slovak, and that's part of my connection with Globsec. At Globsec, I am an associate senior fellow, and I cover the financing of defense and security with capital and private markets. I'm also a senior advisor at ODI in the UK. And here in the Czech Republic, and I have many friends here from it, I am vice chairman of CERGI, the US foundation that supports it. So thank you very much for being here. I'd like to introduce my fellow panelists, please. I'd like to start with Vladimir Dluhy. He is president of Eurochambers. Marek Kapička, director of CERGI. Martin Kocher, former Federal Minister of Labor and Economy of Austria. And Ivan Miklos, president of MESA 10 and former Minister of Finance of Slovakia. Gentlemen, please sit down. I'd like to set a little bit of context for what we're going to discuss today. Our topic is the 2025 Economic Security Outlook, and we're going to focus on Europe. Mark de Vos actually wrote a piece in the FT recently, and I'm going to summarize it very quickly. European nations have become conscious that the European project is now a hard power project that needs a geostrategic footprint beyond its current boundaries. We've been here before. In the early 1950s, post-war Europe tried and failed to institutionalize political and defense cooperation. Back then, it was American prosperity and a European economic community that enabled peace and prosperity. Today, we are fending for ourselves. With economic development subservient to geopolitics, failure is simply not an option. So fiscal buffers are eroding just as strategic demands intensify. Defense spending is rising, supply chains are being recalibrated, and industrial policy is back in fashion. Yet questions persist about Europe's capacity to grow, compete, and remain secure in times of mounting pressure. At the same time, the notion of a unified transatlantic economic alliance is being tested. Diverging priorities of trade, climate, and subsidies are straining coordination between democratic partners. It is the idea of a shared economic front amongst like-minded nations still viable, or are we entering a more fragmented and transactional global economy? These are the big questions that we are going to be exploring. Now, for me, what I hear from this summary is a big questions of resilience. And I'd like to start, please, with Marek Kapička. And Marek, how should we define resilience in economic terms?
Okay, thanks for the question. So let me start at, of course, there's lots of talks about how to reorient the economies to make them more resilient. The way I would think about this and the way the economist thinks about this, that this should not be a complete overhaul. I mean, one of the biggest assets are economies that are functioning efficiently and without too many regulations. And there might be a little bit of a threat of going too far in this direction and imposing broad tariffs to just make the economy more self-sustained. I think that would be a mistake. The way to think about this is perhaps an add-on, as supplements, very targeted supplements to an otherwise functioning economy. Perhaps the way to think about this, if you're an economist, is to think about some kind of a national security externality coming from certain sectors, perhaps, or activities. And once you start thinking about externalities, economists usually know what to do. We know how to regulate externalities. For instance, a firm importing critical minerals will take into account certain things. Will take into account that there's going to be an increase in price of those minerals in case of a conflict, but will not take into account that it has an effect on the country's bargaining position in case of a conflict. So that really is the externality, that the actions affect the bargaining position of the country, and that's not taken into account. So perhaps the way to think about this is to have really, identify the sectors where those externalities are the largest, and do very targeted interventions. But there are several problems with this. First of all, what are the critical sectors? And that's going to depend as well on what kind of a conflict you have in mind. If you think about a trade war with the US, it's a very different conflict than with Russia. It's a very different conflict than with China. So there's lots of unknowns, and more work needs to be done to identify this. And one last comment. There is a danger of going too far in resilience as well for strategic reasons. And that's, if you become more resilient, it's likely that the opponent will become more resilient as well. So it improves your bargaining position, but as well theirs. And so the net effect is not clear. And second, there's perhaps a danger of becoming too resilient within a group of allies. So if let's say every country in the European Union is too independent or resilient, it's going to reduce the willingness of other countries to help in case of a conflict. So there are those strategic considerations that needs to be taken into account and weigh all the costs and benefits.
Thank you very much for putting that in such great perspective. As you were mentioning about transatlantic partnerships in China, I have a question actually for Ivan, who actually you run Eurochambers, which represents 60% of EU employment for SMEs. And so what is the growth potential of the European economy relative to its transatlantic partners and to China?
This question for Vladimir, I think.
Oh, I'm so sorry, Vladimir. Okay, apologies.
That's fine. We know each other for such a long time. We have known each other. That's no problem. Well, let me start to provoke a little bit. We got, in preparation to this panel, we got just 5 points about Europe. First, what is the growth potential of the European economy relative to its transatlantic partners? My answer is low. Second, can Europe sustain rising defense spending without sacrificing long-term competitiveness and fiscal health? My answer as to fiscal health, no. Are macroeconomic conditions, rates, inflation, debt, supporting or undermining Europe's economic security goal? Undermining. Is meaningful transatlantic economic coordination still realistic, or is the concept of democratic economic alliances losing ground? Losing ground. What are Europe's strategic options in a world of contested globalization and increasingly transactional partnerships? Are there any options for Europe in the short run? I don't think there are not very many. But back to your economic resilience question, because in general, I tend to agree with what has been said here before. Let's have a look at the sectors. Let's also consider the strategic issues. I would very much underline, for instance, should we retaliate against Donald Trump's tariffs with all that list for 95 billion euros, which Maroš Šefčovič has somewhere in the drawer? What Marek said, I would be rather careful. But if you are asking me about my membership base, yes, about 20 million small and business scale entrepreneurs in Europe and also affiliated country. For them, indeed, the problem of Europe lagging behind, not only over the last 20 years, but the last 40 years, is about deregulation, simplification, scaling up economic policies towards deepening single market, even calling for the capital union, because even small and medium-scale enterprises, especially the startups, do not have appropriate access to capital in Europe compared to the United States. It's about the skills, and it's about the security in the economic sense. But the main economic sense, that means the issue of the very high prices of energy in Europe, especially electricity and gas, securing the supply chain, not only in the critical minerals, but in many other things. But the main problem, which I'm getting back from all the surveys which we do, is about simplification, deregulation. Let's take, for instance, the Green Deal and all the ESG regulation. Europe has been bureaucratized since the 60s. But with the Green Deal and the ESG regulation, it has been even more regulated. We have all those reporting directives. Who does know something about corporate sustainability due diligence directive, corporate sustainability reporting directive? Then we have CBAM. We have many other things. The large companies, they can hire all those big auditors. They pay a lot of money for this reporting because of the regulation, and because they are usually the price makers on the big markets, they can pass the cost to the prices. Small and medium-scale enterprises don't have money for that. They usually increase the cost because of it, because they are price takers. They cannot pass it to the market, and it further on undermines their competitiveness. With all this, we made a great job for the auditors, for the law companies, and for general advisories like, I don't have anything against Deloitte or EY, but it's a great business. It's a great business for them. And some people are beginning to say, and this is only my personal view, that why don't we abandon, for instance, the Green Deal and ESG targets? Now, soon Europe is going to reconfirm the Green Deal targets for 2040. When I'm saying that, I'm being accused that I'm anti-green, anti-European. No, I believe it's enough if you look outside the window and you see that there should be something done with the climate. But targets, sanctions, and regulations will not change the climate. It's going to be the investment into the modern technologies, into the green technologies, which indeed at the end of the day are going to have a positive effect on the climate change. And I'm afraid that if I look at other regions, like United States, well, with Trump, I don't want to look much at the United States. Okay, let's say other regions who do not have such a target, who do not have a straitjacket of the regulation, and still they are able to invest much better. They are much more productive, much more competitive, even in the green technologies. And I would bet, and I'm too old to see the results, that in 30 years, even these regions will be able to face the problem of the climate change better than Europe is today, with all is leading by example that we are going to be the most aggressive in fighting the climate change. And this is being reflected more and more also from the small and medium-scale enterprises.
That's very interesting, as small to medium-sized enterprises are the backbone really globally of all economies. What I hear you saying is that regulatory compliance is terrifically and horrifically expensive for small companies. And you mentioned access to capital. A couple of other panels that I led really talked about access to capital and how hard or easy that was here within the EU. Within the various countries that you are operating in, are you finding that, for example, sort of bank financing or other routes to which there is access to capital, some are better than others? Is it easier in Germany versus Austria or Czechia?
Well, definitely there are the differences. In the Eurochamber, I have 38 countries, including countries like Georgia, Turkey, Western Balkans, etc. In the core EU countries, there are also differences, but the general attitude is that to a certain level, even the startups Of course, in Europe, they use basically bank financing, commercial financing. And even the West European startups, for instance, when they reach a certain level, they very often just incorporate in either Singapore or the United States or else, because there must be a deepening of the capital market. We are speaking about it. Well, Enrico Letta now doesn't talk about the capital market. He speaks about saving and investment.
The saving and investment union, yes.
But it's basically a capital market. You know, sometimes I used to be a friend of those Czech conservative old Eurosceptics, and I am now considered to be a traitor because on one side I'm saying much less Europe in regulation, etc. But at the same time I'm saying, especially now when we are facing the dangers globally, when we are facing hostile American administration, we need more Europe exactly in the capital markets, in deepening the single market, etc. So it's some type of a middle way where we are going to abandon some of the reasons which definitely brought us to the situation when we are lagging behind many other regions in the world, and at the same time using the potential and Draghi's report with all those questions which you can discuss almost on every page, but in total is a very good report, and Draghi's report is clear. It's a blueprint. Just do it.
Thank you very much. That was wonderful. So that's on a very fundamental level. I'd like to zoom back out about macroeconomic conditions. So are the macroeconomic conditions of interest rates, inflation, and debt supporting or undermining European economic security goals? And I'd like to bring Martin in on this.
Thanks for the question, and thanks for having me. As always, it's difficult because politics tries to find excuses for not being able to do things that are necessary to do. And let's probably go back a couple of years when we had a perfect environment for investments in many areas and for structural reforms. There was zero interest rates. We had the peace dividend that was huge for many European countries. When we look back, did the European countries and the European Union put forward those structural reforms and those investments? Partly, but not to the extent that would have been possible at that times. Now we are in a different situation. The situation is more complicated, macroeconomically speaking. There is the trade-offs that are within the economic decisions are more apparent now, which makes it, of course, more difficult. But I think in the end, when you look back in history, in economic history, decisions have to be taken when they have to be taken, and you cannot wait until the macroeconomic climate is perfect. And even if you wait, you would not be able then to push through the decisions that have to be taken. That means, of course, and I think that's very important to keep in mind, that means that the trade-offs we have to be actually mentioned, in my view, very publicly. Economists tend to think in trade-offs. Politicians tend to think in panaceas. There is no panacea. You need to talk about the trade-offs. And when we talk about economic resilience, when we talk about economic security, there's always trade-offs involved.
What are these trade-offs?
The trade-offs means it creates higher costs if you are more resilient. You cannot have everything. So some strategic papers, they want to keep the industry as it is. They want to bring back some strategic production to the European Union to become more sovereign, and they want to support new young companies, the startups Vladimir was talking about, and providing capital to those to quickly grow and become successful. And these are three different goals, and all of them have their merits. But doing that at the same time will be difficult given the budgetary situation, will be difficult given the capacities, the political capacities, and so on. So we'll probably have to talk more about these trade-offs and select, you talked about externalities, select those policies that give us the highest value added for the priorities we have to set politically. And I think talking about that is important because you cannot have all at the same time.
And in terms of like the priorities of these trade-offs, do you have a sense of what would be of the highest priority of those for the EU to consider?
So I think there's two different goals that the Commission has set clearly. One is becoming a stronger player and a more secure place. That means investments in security. The other one is becoming more competitive and regaining some of the competitiveness we've lost. And those two things go together in certain areas. In some areas, they go in different directions. But in some areas, they really go together. So there is not a trade-off in the sense that both cannot be achieved. But it requires, of course, decisions that are not easy sometimes to take. And of course, again, that's the problem we often have in the European Union. With some of the decisions, some countries benefit more than others, and the other way around. And that's of course sometimes difficult because then you have to go on this supranational level, which makes it difficult in the European European Union. But I think the overall targets are achievable, and even there is some complementarities between those two large objectives of the European Union at the moment that can actually bring the two goals together. Actually,
that's actually a very interesting way to put it. So I'd like to now look at America as a driver around setting some of these priorities, and is a meaningful transatlantic economic coordination still realistic, or is the concept of democratic alliances losing ground? Ivan?
Yeah, thank you. Of course, times are very different now, but I still believe that transatlantic cooperation and alliance is inevitable for the future, despite of the current situation. But let's return back to Europe, because this is, I think, the most important. If you are speaking about resilience, the most important precondition for resilience is economic strength and competitiveness. It depends on competitiveness. Reality is that while US is holding the share of global economy during last decades on the same level, China, other developing countries are growing, Europe is failing, which means economic strength of Europe definitely is weaker. I'm old enough to remember that when I was first time finance minister, it was more than 20 years ago. In 2005, it was mid of Lisbon strategy. For those who don't remember, EU took in 2000 Lisbon strategy, which the main goal was to catch up US in the competitiveness till 2010. And in 2005, we have been in the mid of this, and as Minister of Finance, we discussed in ECOFIN again, why the gap is widening and not decreasing. And it is reminding me, I'm speaking about this because Vladimir mentioned the Draghi report, and the main conclusion of the Draghi report was that Europe needs much more single market, which we don't have completion. Europe has lack of investment, lack of innovation, over bureaucracy. This is exactly what we have been speaking 20 years ago. Exactly. That the Europe needs these reforms which will solve these problems. At that time, Jean-Claude Juncker, who was chairman of ECOFIN, famously said, we all, of course, know what to do, but what we don't know is how to win elections after doing this, which means I'm speaking about political costs and political difficulties of reforms. But now, because now situation is really new, really difficult, really on the edge, hopefully, because usually people are saying that politicians are doing what is necessary only after trying everything else. Which means hopefully now we are on the edge and this necessity is clear. And in connection with the US and with the trade wars, which already started, it is very interesting that, for instance, a recent IMF study showed that internal barriers inside of EU are such high that as it was tariffs for the goods on level 45% and tariffs on the services more than 100%, which means we have so strong so-called implicit tariffs and barriers for internal from 31% to 55% during last 15 years. No, last 25 years. In China and in US, it was increasing only from 34 to 37 and 23 to 25%, which means Europe was extremely opened to outside and closed inside. And in today's trade war situation, it is very, very detrimental. But at the same time, and for instance, for countries like Slovakia, Slovakian export share to GDP is 92%. Which means at the present conditions of the closing the world and trade wars, it is extremely, extremely detrimental. Which means just to do some partial reforms in completion of single market, investment growth, innovation growth, deregulation, which is huge, and Vladimir talked about this, could bring a lot of opportunities for higher economic growth. Higher economic growth are necessary precondition for solving almost everything. I'm not saying everything, but if you're speaking about necessity to increase investment to the safety, to the military, to the solving the fiscal tensions, over indebtedness which we have, economic growth is the solution. But the problem, and let me conclude by this, because the biggest problem is not economic one. We know what to do. Diagnoses have been done, not only by Draghi, before by Letta report, Monti report, other reports. Problem is how to do this. And the biggest obstacle is not economic. The biggest obstacle is political. Because we are living now in the we are facing very complex challenges, geopolitical, international trade, security, and so on and so on. At the same time, Europe is very fragmented. Which means, and how to overcome is not easy, because the biggest problem is that the European identity is still not enough strong to have one voice policy or common policy on the European level. At the same time, we have formal rules, veto right, not in every areas, but in some rights, which are detrimental in this regard, because especially small countries like, for instance, Hungary or Slovakia, unfortunately, that they could block everything. That's the reason why those who really feel the necessity to do something are creating informal alliances, like in military cooperation, even in cooperation with UK, which some EU countries are excluded from this.
Can you give an example, please?
Yeah, example is this military cooperation, this coalition of willings, which
the cows.
UK and some EU countries, majority of EU countries, are now discussing about creating a new fund and doing much more investment to military. Yeah? And not all EU countries are invited there. Slovakia and Hungary are not invited to these discussions. Yeah? And in solving the problem for these economic reforms, is either to change these formal rules, but it will be very difficult, but if not, then to create informal coalitions which will change the things, to have much more common policy and one voice policy in these areas which are inevitable and necessary for increased competitiveness and economic growth of Europe.
It's very interesting, because I can tell you firsthand it's not appreciated in the United States. In the U.S. feels that its tariffs have this enormous impact all over Europe, and you're saying it's inter-European trade and regulation that is very stifling, and this is also what we heard from Vladimir as well. Actually, I would like to put this question back to Vladimir too, again, because you're at the coalface of this. Do you think that this deregulation has a very big potential driver, and it should be achievable, of economic growth within the EU and also in the other areas that you covered? Do you think that's actually achievable? And what are the barriers to it?
Well, the barriers still seem to me to be political. Yes, there is a substantial change in the new Commission compared to von der Leyen Commission 1. But the change is in words. The buzzword is not Green Deal anymore. The buzzword is competitiveness. We have all those omnibuses, because Brussels loves the slogans, so now the popular slogan is omnibus. Omnibus in terms of the regulation, omnibus for the chemical industry, omnibus for automotive, etc., etc. But to quote, I don't want to be too intellectual, but Shakespeare in Hamlet, I think Polonius is asking Hamlet, "What are you reading, my lord?" And Hamlet famously answers, words, words, words. What I want to see are the deeds. And this goes to your question. I am currently still not convinced that the urgent need, it's not about 5 years of the lasting of the von der Leyen's II Commission. It's about a year, about 2 years, how we really restart the good conditions for the especially small and medium scale businesses. Because of my membership base, SMEs, I am maybe too much engaged in the regulation and simplification. Yes, there are many other things, and let me not go to that. Draghi's report and others are clear what to do. But let me also make last comment in this intervention about the politics, which Ivan mentioned. In the liberal think tanks, conferences like this, there is one elephant in the room. And these are the big populist parties, and the question why so many people are voting for those populist parties. Why even my membership base, the small and medium-scale enterprises, not only from Central Europe, but many of them in Germany, in Benelux, in France, etc.
Why do you think?
Are more and more, well, we should ask that. We should not say that they are populist, they are bad, they are neo-fascists. We should ask why people are voting for them. And the answer is clear. These populist parties, despite in the other areas, the political relations to the Russian-Ukraine war, relations to the migration, these are the parties which I would never touch. But in the area of the economics and the regulation, they very often say the same thing as I am saying here. And that makes them more and more attractive, because they believe that Europe is providing the straitjacket and these parties are against the Europe. So I'm going to vote for them, because if they win, they will remove me of the regulatory straitjacket. And it's as simple as that. So rather than to cry that what the hell is Donald Trump doing in the White House? Well, it's Donald Trump in the White House. We will not change it. We should ask why we have executed the policies over last 2 decades, since the famous Lisbon strategy, that brought us to the situation that we have Orban, we have Fico, we have half-half situation in Poland, and we're going to have Babiš in the autumn here. Let's be frank. And why? Because Europe does not fulfill what the people would like to see.
And so again,
I'm a little bit sorry, you know, when you are chairing an institution for 20 million SMEs, you become to be nervous, and I'm also old, so less resilient.
Less resilient. Actually, Martin, I'd like to put this question to you. So the context of it is the ECB projects the euro area GDP growth for 2025 far below the US and China. Meanwhile, defense spending is on the rise as a percentage of GDP by 2027. How can Europe reconcile sluggish growth with its ambition to compete globally?
I think that has been mentioned before by some of the speakers. Growth is, of course, and competitiveness is a precondition for having the capacity to invest in areas you want to invest in. So I think it is a clear objective to become more competitive and to have higher growth levels. Actually, even for the green transition, for the renewable energy transition, we need a certain level of growth to finance the investments that are necessary to achieve our targets. So this will be key. And we're talking very often about the short run, and you mentioned the forecast for the short run. I'm not so much concerned about the short run. I'm concerned more about the structural potential growth opportunities of Europe. And some of the things have been mentioned, the implicit tariffs within the European Union, the regulation. We haven't talked about the aging of the society. There's a couple of aspects that reduce our potential growth within Europe. And it's not possible for the European Union to respond to all of these structural concerns or structural challenges that we have. But there is a couple of things when you talk about the single market, when you talk about venture capital, when you talk about innovation, when you talk about technology, when you talk about the barriers within the European single market, all these things could be addressed and should be addressed. And as Vladimir said, there's lots of, I think, good intentions already here. The words he mentioned from Shakespeare. We'll see whether the Commission and the member countries will be able to pull it off. After all, I think, and that's important to keep in mind, the power of the European Union comes from the single market and perhaps from the region, the neighbors of the European Union, the extension potential that we have, the expansion potential that we have, accession of new countries. This is the power of the European Union. We are the largest economic region in the world. There is, economically speaking, still a very strong stance of the European Union, and improving that, advancing that will help to achieve other targets that we have, geopolitical aspects, security aspects. That's the way of thinking perhaps of an economist, but I think if you cannot achieve more competitiveness, it will be difficult to succeed in other areas where we think it's necessary to work together more closely.
Thank you. Actually, this is a good opportunity to for the audience, actually, if they wish to contribute some questions, you can do so through the Slido. It should be up here, the Slido hashtag, and I can pick those questions up and see it here. Yes. Okay, actually, if somebody wishes, go right ahead, please.
Thank you so much.
Can you, sorry, can you say your name and the institution that you're from?
I'm Andrej Nosko and I'm from Slovakia. Just two remarks. The first one is, actually, some of this regulation that Mr. Dlouhý mentioned, they have explicit exemptions for SMEs. So either those companies that are worried about them are not SMEs, or we need to look at actually at the facts. And I think I'm also a little bit tired of the self-flagellation that we do in Europe. We sort of bash ourselves for how bad we are, but actually this is still among the top places in the world where people want to live. And I want to talk about the energy prices, because that's an area that I'm actually following and I can speak about. The high prices are unfortunately a function of the market that we try to create. We had bad economic policy in a very good time that actually led to populism that we right now are facing. And I think we need to also start thinking outside of the box. I mean, some of the regions that are most innovative are not most innovative because of the market, but because of the public investment and engagement in the economy. And we have to decide, because on one hand, we say that the freer the market, the better, but actually what we see, the market failures are beyond what we can just simply regulate. And I think we need to really start looking for solutions that allow not only growth that creates and undermines our societies, but we need to think about the growth that actually maintains the reason why Europe is different from other places around the world. Because what people are expecting, they're not expecting economic growth. That is unfortunately given to 5 individuals owning half of the planet. But people are expecting that their quality of life will be good. Children are expecting that they can at least live as good as their parents. And my question is actually, how can we maintain the European way of life and actually look at the new economic solutions and leave behind economic policy that I also studied that has been discredited as not based on facts?
That's a very good question. A panelist who would like to address that.
I'd love to. Well, sir, we definitely are not on the same page, but that's normal in the discussion. First, and you mentioned many things. Energy prices, yes, that I'm calling it a merit-based generation, for instance, of the electricity prices through those auctions. By the way, it was a model which for this country, Czech Republic, till the start of the pandemic, or rather till the start of the energy crisis, worked excellently well. The prices were relatively low. Now we have the vengeance, and the prices in Europe are 3 or 4 times, especially in our region, more than in many other regions of the world. I spoke to Commissioner Jorgensen from Denmark by the end of April, and I started with this question: Commissioner, what are we going to do so that we small and medium-scale enterprises do not face such high prices? And he said, in the short run, don't expect any solution. It's about the more investment into the renewables. It's more investment to the efficiency, which will slowly bring the prices down. So even from the mouth of the responsible commissioner, I heard that I shouldn't expect any short-term improvement, which is one of the most difficult issues for the European competitiveness into the future. And as to the regulation, again, I agree with one thing which was implicitly. I'm criticizing European Union. A lot of regulation goes also for the responsibility of the national governments, of the gold plating, different ways how the European directives are differently imposed in different countries. Each destroys level playing field. But we must deregulate. We must do something about that, because it will bring, as I said already, very strong political consequences. And if I may, because I said at the beginning we are on a different pages, I don't think that Europe is different. I don't believe in some special European way of life, that we are better than other regions. I even would go as far, and forgive me, that our European way of life undermined the efficiency, productivity, the zeal of several generations compared to other generations in other regions. So I wouldn't like to see Europe as some type of a special continent with a special way of life.
That's a very powerful statement. We have a Slido question that sort of speaks into that too, and I'd like to put this to Medik, please. GDP per capita growth over the past decade, USA versus EU, 27 to 22% versus 18%. So what is all the fuss about with such a high GDP growth?
Okay, so I guess, if you look at longer periods, we've got, COVID and other things in the past decade, but still, US is coming ahead, and it may not look large, but if you look really at the last 30 to maybe 35 years, then you see that small differences over years will just accumulate into a very substantial gap between GDP growth, between difference, and especially productivity difference between Europe and the US. If you go back to early 1990s. The productivity per hour worked was about the same. Nowadays, it's about 20% lower in Europe than in the US. And on top of it, Europe is working less. There's less labor market attachment, so that makes the gap in GDP per capita even larger. But it's fair to say that the US, we kind of think here about maybe the US being the ideal where we want to get. The US has not been growing particularly fast either. So this may not be. This may be a statement about problems on both sides, rather than that we're doing well.
Thank you. Medik has a lot of experience with the U.S. because you lived and worked there for a while as well. Actually, I'd like to throw the same question open to Ivan. I saw you taking some notes, and maybe put it in a bit of a context around. I'm getting lots of questions here about our energy and economic security, and as we are so reliant on undemocratic and unreliable regimes for our energy.
Yeah, a lot of questions have been opened, which means regarding US versus Europe, yeah, that's true. That difference is not so high, but over the time it is growing difference. But at the same time, it is necessary to say that the US has its own real problems. Yeah. regarding sustainability, income disparities, and so on, especially today, in connection with the negative consequences of the ignorant Trump's economic policy, not only in the tariffs, but also, for instance, now with this big, beautiful bill, which was passed and which is creating threat of fiscal unsustainability and so on, so on, so on. And also tensions, political tensions connected with this. Regarding criticism to EU, yeah, it is necessary to say that on one side we have here these problems which we already mentioned: overregulation, bureaucracy, a lack of single market, and so on, so on. On the other side, I have to say that usually we are not speaking about positives of the European Union. If, for instance, I can imagine that my country is out of the EU, not speaking about openness and dependent on the trade and economic relations, but also like fiscal responsibility. EU pressure and the Growth and Stability Pact is creating really strong pressure to disciplinize the public finance. I can imagine that fiscal situation in my country could be much, much worse, if not EU. Then competition, which means anti-monopoly policy and regulation of the state aid and subsidies and so on. So foreign trade, if I can imagine that Slovakia is negotiating trade agreement with China or 500 million euro, which means there are a lot of positives which we are usually not mentioning if we are speaking about these things. And last point, the question about, because it was connected with the question about what is the reason of this growth of populism. And I agree that it is very, very complex phenomenon, but at least one factor which played important role was very non-existing policy in the regulating of the immigration, for instance. It is connected, of course, with the aging problem, which is a very serious problem for the Europe. But now it is clear turning, and I have to say that it was a very big mistake, because in every textbook of economic or state, you have protection of the external border is the basic obligation of every state. Of course, if we have Schengen, that we have common external border, which means there have been a lot of reasons why we are where we are. But now, for the future, and this is important for the future, I think because threat from this non-democratic country, and especially for the future, China, of course, is the biggest threat. The transatlantic cooperation and common approach to strengthening cooperation and resilience will be really very, very important and unavoidable. And one of the biggest problems of today's Trump's policy is that instead of trying to cooperate together to facing this threat, potential threat, which will grow. Because, for instance, I am convinced, and not only me, but the reality is that China's regime is losing steam. And this model is also because demographic reasons, also because other reasons. But when China will be growing less, the tensions and the risk of geopolitical conflicts will increase. Because the social conflict which exists, a social contract which exists in China, that communists have all power, but people's life is improving permanently, is not maybe sustainable. And if not, then imperialistic aggression is the easiest way how to hold popularity and power if economic and social conditions are not improving. We have seen it in Russia many times, last time 2020 till now, and this is something what is a real threat for the future, and it increases importance of the cooperation, transatlantic cooperation.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We're about to wrap up here, and I want to actually throw a question to each of the panelists. If you can answer it very quickly, we've got 2 minutes. There was a lot of discussion around the opportunities and challenges around the structural growth here in the EU. And I'd like for you to each give me one example of each of what is an opportunity and what is a challenge. And we'll start with you, Vladimir.
What is the opportunity, you mean economic business-wise? Well, definitely use the single market and try to deepen it, and remove all the internal barriers which other colleagues mentioned. What is the biggest problem? Biggest problem or biggest threat is, I must say it, regulation and the slow speed of deregulation, combined with also what I tried to shortly mention, the political fragmentation of Europe.
Fantastic.
As
Matic?
the US is fragmented, Europe becomes to be fragmented as well.
Thank you. Matic?
I agree with what was said, but I'm just going to say something different. The opportunity perhaps might be defense spending. We know that if it's done well, it could contribute to productivity growth for a long period after the defense spending is gone. The threat or the challenge is how to manage that with the high public deficits, and that's...
Fantastic. Martin?
I'll try to say something new because I mean, lots of things have been said and I agree. I think the chance that we have is being more innovative. Innovation is key, and the European Union has a big chance here to become at the forefront when we achieve business models out of innovation in a better way. And the threat, also a new one, I think I mentioned it briefly, the decline in the number of workers in the European Union, the aging of the society, is a threat that requires
demographic time bomb.
Demographic time bomb requires political answers on the level of the nation states mainly, not on the European Union level. Actually.
Thank you.
Yeah, maybe if I'm thinking about this, opportunity is current crisis, which means opportunity is current threat.
Okay.
Because it depends how we will face this crisis. If correctly, it will be opportunity. If not, then it will be threat and problem.
Thank you very much. Thank our panelists very much. Thank you all for coming this morning.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the moderator of the next session, Chris Stoker-Walker.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for joining us this morning. I'm very grateful for you getting up quite so early after our party last night. I hope that there's not too many sore heads. We are unfortunately going to be discussing a really important issue that is going to vex us, I think, for the coming years. Future-proofing the news, which is a huge issue. We're going to have, as you can see, a brilliant panel of some of Europe's biggest broadcasters, publications, news agencies coming up in a short period of time. But first, we're going to get a presentation here from Dritan Nesho, CEO of HarrisX, trying to set up, I think, some of our issues. So please do welcome Dritan to the stage.
Thank you, everyone, and thank you for your time this morning. I'm just going to make sure we have the presentation. Hopefully, this data will be provocative enough to wake some of you up, given that it's early in the morning. So I think we can get the presentation. HarrisX is a global research consultancy, and we conduct a lot of research at the intersection of technology and media. For this specific session and for GlobeSec this year, we conducted a study of over 3,000 respondents across the United States, United Kingdom, France, Germany, and Italy in a randomized fashion, and we showed them a collection of real content and deep fakes. And after the fact, we asked them, or after each of the reveal of each of the content, whether they thought that this was real or not real. And what we learned is that in the age of AI-driven misinformation, at best you lose 1/3 of your audience to fake content, and at worst you lose over half of it. And here's what we mean. On average, only about 63% of the respondents across the countries could really correctly tell whether the content was AI or whether it was real. And you can see that the figures speak for themselves. But 37% could not.
I've never heard that.
Even real content, such as this one, where President Trump was
down to 100 and then down to another number. And I said you have to open up your whole country.
President Zelensky showed up to the White House.
Go back 1 second. But, you know, sometimes the content in and of itself is incredulous. So this was President Trump responding to the meme taco. Trump always chickens out in the end. And you can see that as a baseline, 21% didn't think that the content was real. 69% in this case did. But when the content
President Zelensky showed up to the White House wearing an outfit from Temu, and I found that very disrespectful, I have to be honest. I'm going to start calling him Temu Zelensky from now on. Someone get this guy a suit, for Christ's sake.
Right, so this was one of our interns who spent about 10 minutes building this through artificial intelligence tools. Temu is not available in the United States, just so you know, so especially for American audiences, this would not be a familiar outfit, but you see that 2 in 4 Americans, 40%, could not recognize this as a deep fake, and 37% globally as well. Here's another example that 47% incorrectly identified as real. This is another deepfake. This was voice-based. And essentially, Trump has always teased Canada about becoming the 51st state. But he has never gone as far as saying, you know, we should conquer it. And we basically created some copy that said, a lot of Canadians will welcome us. They wouldn't fight back. They know it's better as part of a speech. And in many cases globally, 47% on average, they could not tell whether this was real or fake.
Canada would be much...
And then we showed an example of a deepfake that surfaced right after the start of the war in Ukraine. This was widely publicized as a Russian misinformation campaign, as a deepfake. So the audience is very conditioned. But 75% correctly said that it was AI generated. 25% still thought it was real, even though it's very, very abrupt and very, very rough as a deepfake. But when you create something a little bit more subtle, even though people are prompted in this study to, after the first few examples, to really try to figure out whether content is real or not, in this case, 50% incorrectly said that it was real. And of course, we have hidden the nature of the symbols in order not to popularize these types of content or deepfake. So some of the learnings from the experiment. In an environment where a third of voters or more can be swayed by artificial intelligence and deepfake content, frankly, it could tip any election. And no public is safe before an election or otherwise. And as generative AI is improving, it's not only fooling people about what fake content is, but also it's making them distrust what real content is. After the experiment, on average, 40% of people said that they can tell the difference, whereas at the beginning of the experiment, they were a lot more confident that they could distinguish between deep fakes, AI-driven content, and real content. The shorter the content is, the more subtle it is, the more effective it is. This is a problem because social media runs on short-form multimedia content. And again, if it is absurd or if it is too far-fetched, people tend to question it more. But the more real it is, the more concerning it is. And so these are a set of provocative findings. I have some other research and information in terms of regulation. Simply put, people would like this content regulated. Over 7 in 10 believe that there should be guardrails and a regulation framework. And I think that this is very important because we are at the beginning of this revolution. And this revolution is about to upend the news, is about to possibly upend elections and society at large. Similar to social media, but in this case on steroids. So with that, thank you, and I will go through some other data points during the presentation.
For Dritan. Thank you very much, Dritan. And if I can maybe also ask you to welcome similarly our panelists on stage. So first, can I have Beata Bologova, the Editor-in-Chief of SME here. And then Stephen Kappas, President, Radio Free Europe and Radio Liberty. Very welcome, Stephen, please. We have Liz Corbin, the Director of News at the EBU, the European Broadcasting Union. And we have Roman Imielski, who is First Deputy Editor-in-Chief of Gazeta Wyborcza. Brilliant. Just to flag also, you will see on our screen behind, we have got a Slido open for you and we will have some Q&A time at the end. There will be a QR code that you can look at, which will appear on screen shortly, and you can maybe put in your questions there. I have an iPad ready and waiting to hear those thoughts. There you go, up on screen for you. A really provocative, I think, presentation by Dritan. Beata, when Dritan was presenting there, you kind of leaned over and whispered something in my ear. What is your reaction to that?
That I would like to put the findings of the presentation into real context. When we think about autocrats and dictators, we imagine, very often imagine, these aging guys who can direct armies against demonstrators or ride half-naked a horse. And we don't associate technological advancement with them very often. But that's a mistake, and I think that with the developing AI models, autocrats and oppressive regimes get a powerful tool. And maybe I would mention some examples. 5 years ago, when we explained to our readers what is the difference between a fake news site and a real site, we referred to lack of quality. We said, look at Pixel's photos, look at how it is not professionally done. It's no longer true. In Hungary, I just read recently that one of the main propaganda outlet, Origo, fired people and laid them off. And even though I'm not sure how much they use AI content, but it really sends a message that autocrats no longer need people, or not journalists. We don't even call these propagandists journalists, but they no longer need people who would do journalistic processes because they don't do journalistic processes. So that's why I think it would be a big mistake, and we shouldn't repeat the mistake when we allowed the platforms to grasp power without any control of national governments or Europe, because the consequence will be given the ability not only spread fake news, but censor, track sources we are using, basically multiply and enlarge any narrative. I just read recently that Business Insider also laid off 21% of their employees because of anticipating the drop of traffic. It means more pressure on media, and if you imagine media in captured environments like Slovakia, Hungary, partly Poland, they're already tackling so much pressure, verbal attacks, harassment, troll farms, which can be, again, with the use of AI and new technologies, you can so effectively harass journalists. So if you add the fact that these media will face drop in visits, because people no longer will come to your website to ask about the weather, to ask about health advices, or where I should go for my holiday. So basically, it adds up to pressures. And maybe I'm here to be the scaremonger and to be very pessimistic. So I add one more.
Well, that's okay. I mean, I don't want to be too pessimistic on a Saturday morning. But I mean, you mentioned pressures on the media. Stephen, Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, well documented the pressures that you're facing as well. What do you make of that?
Well, I mean, I think this is a time, first, you know, my initial reaction to seeing the presentation is kind of what we're living in, which is an age of information warfare. And I have to say that my assessment is that it's not going well. We are up against very well-financed and very determined people who want to manipulate information. Information is power. Human beings have an insatiable curiosity and a desire to be informed, entertained, and so everybody look at in pretty much every room that you enter these days, and people are staring at their phones, seeking whatever they can find. There is undeniably an effort right now to control the information space. I don't think anybody will ever control it. However, those of us who are purveyors of accurate, truthful information are up against very strong forces. You talked about RFERL's existential crisis that we have right now. It's grounded in funding. And we're continuing to fight, and we're still here. We intend to win this battle to keep Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty alive. But at a time when public service broadcasters all across the world are having their budgets slashed, are having cutbacks in newsroom, the tools available to journalists are being taken away. I think that this is a time when we should be joining forces. This is not a time for competitiveness, that the forces who would like to be the purveyors of disinformation are very active, and they're not going to stop at anything. You see what they've done with manipulating, what Russia's done with manipulating elections in Romania and Moldova, and the tremendous amount of resources that are being poured into manipulating information on a daily basis. We need some help. And if we try to do it alone, I think we're going to lose this effort. Right now, the true value that we bring to this information battleground is that there is a desire still among people to seek the truth, to seek accurate information. If we lose that reputation, then it will be lost. And that's why they spoof our websites, they take our content and disguise it as, or they take our websites and put their own bad information in and make it look like it's something that's coming from a trusted source. It's all designed to make things cloudy, make it difficult to figure out, have people just kind of throw up their hands and say, I don't know what to believe. That's what they're looking for. So we just can't give up. And I think this age of AI and is really a dangerous time for all of us.
And Liz, Stephen mentioned there kind of working together. I know as the EBU, you do this already. I mean, how are you kind of preparing for the age of AI that Stephen and Beata have both said are very, very scary times?
I mean, all credit to Steve and the team at RFE-RL and their incredibly difficult situation, and we're 100% supporting you and in any practical way that we can. But yes, working together is and there being some things that, of course, we must be competitive to improve the industry and to make sure journalism is at the top of its game. But on other points, we should be working more together, and the competition is not necessary. And so, as public service broadcasters, so I'm the director of news at the European Broadcasting Union, better known for Eurovision, but we have a very strong news department and cooperation in the news space, and pooling resources when we have fewer and fewer resources across our membership is really important. So in the age of AI, for example, we saw all of those excellent examples in the presentation. You can no longer use your eyes to decide whether something is real or fake. Anybody who's seen the output of Google's VO3 in the last couple of weeks will realise that there is just no way, as an individual with no context, you can tell the difference between a real video and a fake video. And that's only going to improve even further and get cheaper. And so that's where journalism comes in, and it's where expertise comes in, to be able to find the context behind that video. The source of that video becomes increasingly important. Is that source reliable? Do you know who they are? Where does it come from? How did they make it? Were they there? We have recently launched something we've called Eurovision News Spotlight, and we have more than around 30 broadcasters now. They're fact-checking and verification teams all working together. So instead of every one of those 30 organisations each having a fact-checker looking at a video, trying to do the geolocation and trying to establish the source and the time and all of the other aspects of it and putting it through an AI checker, one has to do it, and that benefits all of the other broadcasters that are part of that collective. So initiatives like that to cooperate and to share that information are critical. We're here for the public at the end of the day, the citizens that need access to quality information, and they are being bombarded with absolute trash across all of the different platforms that they are inhabiting. And it's our job to try and reach them with quality information and for them to be able to trust our brands and our brands to be seen on those platforms. And just one other point on this. This is a point that was starting to be made earlier, which was the traffic to our websites, to our platforms, as in being increasingly disrupted by AI as well. So any of you have Googled a topic this morning, yesterday, you will have read the overview. Did any of you go to the website that information came from? Like, probably about 5% of you actually went to the website. So this increasing way of accessing information and the big tech being in between the journalists and our audience is a challenge that is far greater than the social media challenge that we've faced over the last 10 to 15 years.
Yeah, there's a huge issue in terms of the sort of just cratering of traffic. I was looking at something yesterday that suggested that kind of the number of bot requests on these websites has increased 49% quarter on quarter, and that is just being put into kind of our search results. I think I want to get onto that in a little bit, but I'm keen. You talked, Liz, about kind of just being bombarded with trash. One of the ways I think that all of our speakers so far have suggested that is coming to us is through social media. And I know, Roman, you actually dislike that idea of calling social media social media. Do you want to maybe explain a bit more about that?
Yes, because social media, it means that this is legacy media. This is not the legacy media. The legacy media is newspapers, radio station, television, and others. We are using at the Gazeta Wyborcza in terms of social platform. Social platform. They are not any. They have no any editors, journalists, and etc. Do you know how many fact checkers right now has Meta, the owner of the Facebook in Poland? No one. No one. This is unbelievable. So this is the problem with big techs, and I referring to what Beata said. I'm not a fan of the regulations. EU market are over-regulated, but we have no regulation on big techs. This is the big problem. After the pandemic, I think that was the barrier between the so-called normal world and abnormal world, because after the pandemic of coronavirus pandemic, we showed that the social platforms are unbelievable spreaders of fake news, disinformation, etc. Really. Maybe you don't know, but we don't know the algorithms of the Google, Facebook, and TikTok and others. This is a big problem because we don't know what they can promote on this big social platforms all over the world. We as a journalist, and we showed before the last election in Poland that it was very surprised, but they promoted many far-right politicians. Why? Why? Because the far-right politicians in Poland are the biggest advocate of the not regulate big techs. Because they are spreading, this is fake news, this is anti-Semitic sometimes, how would say, no, anti-Semitic disinformation and Russian disinformation, etc. So this is very useful for this politician. What Elon Musk said, that everybody has their own truth. Flat earthers, that they are true. Anti-vaxxers, that they are true, yes? And one of the, I don't know, maybe the famous professor from the Harvard University is on the same level for Elon Musk. This is the big problem. 2 months ago, we published an interview with Polish Minister of Digitalization. And this is very interesting because this minister said it's a normal situation that the Polish government don't know what the algorithm has Facebook, Google, TikTok, etc. So Polish government don't know what this platform will promote during the, for example, presidential campaign. We have last week's presidential campaign in Poland. And who is the winner of this presidential campaign? The conservative politician. Who supported this man? Many trolls, many fake news campaigners, etc. And the second one, the biggest, if you talk about the last election in Poland, the second winner is leader of the Confederation, far-right party. Of course, he got only 15% of the voters, of votes, but this is unbelievable, huge difference between the previous presidential campaign in Poland. So yes, we should regulate big techs. We should know everything about the algorithms. We should be fact checkers, and we should believe in the. At Gazeta Wyborcza, we believe in the mission with the quality journalism, and we should be very, very careful to use AI tools as a journalist. Of course, many of these tools are very useful. Many of these tools are very useful, but our credibility is most important. I can't imagine the situation that we will replace our authors by AI. Some media outlets did it.
Yeah. And that's what's really interesting, because I think actually you're doing this in some way and recognizing that is an issue. Beata has talked about Business Insider replacing large numbers of their journalists. Liz, I know that
And it was very interesting what Liz said, because we know that social platforms try to kill legacy media, because this is the business for these social platforms.
Well, there is an interesting question that's come through on the Slido that I want to get to in a second. But before we get to that, Liz, do you want to maybe expand, as an organization that is thinking about using AI responsibly in this world, some of those values that you have?
So we have joined forces, not just with all of our members across the public broadcasting world, across industry across Europe, but also with WAN-IFRA, which is the world's largest association of newspapers and news publishers. Also with other broadcasting unions across the US, Latin America, Asia Pacific, and the Arab States Broadcasting Union, to big collective of news organizations coming together to say there are 5 principles about how we should work with technology companies related to AI. And I don't think we have the slide, so you're going to have to remember the 5 points. But a first principle, which is absolutely you cannot get to the other principles without this. They must have our authorization before they start using our content. Currently, they are scraping valuable news content to create answers and services for the public. And that's, quite frankly, theft. They need to stop stealing our content. Secondly, they need to recognize the fair value of that content when they're using it to make money for themselves. So recognizing fair value if they have the authorization. Thirdly, and maybe this should be the first one, accuracy and attribution matter. The public that are experiencing news content through AI platforms should be confident and be able to be confident that it's accurate, and they should know where the information comes from. Fourthly, the plurality of the news media is something that needs to be protected and will benefit these AI products, chatbots, assistants, etc. The plurality of the media means across every language. Oh, sure, OpenAI will do deals with the Washington Post and a big British newspaper and a broadcaster in a big broadcaster in Sweden and big publishers in Germany. That's no use if you speak Czech or Estonian or another small language where you have less content. It's really important that those AI assistants work in your language and also promote the content from your local newspaper, your local radio station. The plurality of the media will benefit these products, but currently there's no sense that they're doing that. And fifthly, let's talk. We have something as a news industry that they need. They want their products to be accurate, to have good information, to be usable, to be useful. And so we should talk. Let's not make the same mistakes that we made with social media, where there was just us and there was them, and we tried to coexist, but without properly talking to each other. So we urge the tech companies to talk to each other, talk to us, and failing that, we call on the regulators to make them.
Yeah, which is really interesting. I think everybody on this panel has just nodded at me to ask to say something in a second. So I'm going to come to Beata, then I'm going to come to Steve, and then I'm going to come to Rowan. But actually, I want to bring in Dritan, because Dritan, just briefly, you've worked for big tech companies in the past. You've heard Liz's 5 values that she lays out. Many of them involve conversations with big tech. How much appetite do you think there is in the big tech industry to actually engage with us as journalists?
Well, I would say that I agree with everything that is being said right here. But I have a different perspective on the approach that's needed to be taken. Simply put, you cannot fight tomorrow's war with yesterday's weapons and tools. And everything that I'm hearing here is yesterday weapons and tools. You cannot rein in AI given the speed, scale, and sophistication that it has. The only thing that can keep AI in check is the proper use of AI by outfits like the ones that are represented here to do the fact-checking in real time and counter misuse of AI in real time, to amplify good journalism and the voices and the facts of good journalism. And to me, that is the only counterbalance that is an effective counterbalance in this age. We failed to properly regulate and properly engage with the social media space. A very wise, political campaign manager, very successful elected president of the United States, once asked the question, how is it possible that we could create guardrails around nuclear weapons effectively as a human society, but not around social media? And the answer is because with nuclear weapons, you see the damage in a very blunt and very direct and very fast way. With social media, the damage happens through small clicks and through small interactions. And with AI, it will happen even faster. So what I would say is that the perspective also needs to shift. There is an appetite from big tech to work and make sure that to work with the news media, work with governments, and make sure that its technology it's properly used. But what they will not accept is their technology being regulated in such a way that it doesn't allow them to foster the technology. Their job is to push this forward, so we have to keep that in mind. And instead of fighting it, you have to jujitsu it.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I want to bring in Beata and Steve and Roman to answer this, but also maybe just to bring up a Slido question that we have as well that we can maybe consider while we're discussing this, which is one of, I think, a really pointed one that we've discussed a little bit, which is how do you think AI will impact the future of democratic elections? Is this going to result in a more polarized world or less? Beata, I know you have very strong feelings about this.
Yeah, I would like to respond what we heard from the perspective of technological firms. I completely agree that our outlets will need to update our ethical rules. I agree that a lot of media have not done so. I think that there will be a lot of danger of plagiarizing when using AI. I think already journalists are overusing AI and they don't even tell their editors. Just to check, before the panel, I tested AI and I inserted the questions and I asked AI, like ChatGPT, what would you respond? And I got like very sophisticated responses without telling me who said that originally. So I agree. But I also have to say that there is no balanced power between media and platforms. So basically, like the situation is not as such that we, by regulating more our ethical standards and doing the fact-checking, even if we do it, we cannot match the power that platforms have. And platforms don't consider media a partner. They consider us a client. Even after the European Media Freedom Act, even after promises we got from the European Commission that basically the platforms, specifically Meta, will be more responsive to us and that there will be more discussion. But what they did, basically they promised to elevate us to the position of a VIP client. And I think that with all the responsibility that the public puts on our shoulders and expect from us, without like modifying that power balance, I don't think that we are in the position to fact check the fake news. I mean, fake news is like, it hasn't been a journalistic problem for over the past 5 years. It's really, it's not because we are doing substandard journalism that fake news is spreading so fast. It's because the technology is so effectively used by those who want to spread fake news. And one last comment, that if you imagine the power of personalization of news that we as journalists can use, we are getting to that question, that AI is able to so dramatically personalize any question and adjusting to the desires or pre-thoughts of the person who is asking, that we are smashing the shared reality and the shared truth. And that's, again, a challenge that we as journalists alone cannot really address with all the challenges we mentioned without like having more, not the only power, but more openness from the tech giants to basically cooperate with us and consider us as true partners.
And Stephen, you're shaking your head there. I mean, it's not just the two-sided argument of media and big tech. I suppose it is a sort of triangle in that we have politicians who need to regulate here, and the wry smile there is, you know, someone who's had to deal with this. How do we make that work?
Well, it's interesting because RFE-RL has been around now for 75 years. For much of that time, a substantial amount of our efforts have gone to try to overcome those who would like to silence, who would like to jam our feeds, who would like to block our websites, who would like to imprison our journalists. And one of our recently freed journalists from Radio Free Europe is sitting in the front row today. Thank goodness for that. But this just, what ALSU went through for 10 months last year is just an indication of the lengths at which people try to go to silence those who are the purveyors of the truth, who tell stories that that authoritarians don't like to hear. But I think that there is real-time fact-checking going on. There is use of AI tools to help journalists figure out what information is good versus the bad. And on our own means of distribution, through all means necessary these days, I think that we do a good job still. And if we don't, our reputation is lost and it's game over. The problem comes in where Liz made the point that our content is being skimmed, that it's being basically just stolen from us, with no value whatsoever placed around all of the efforts that have gone into generating original reporting or enterprise reporting. And at the end of the day, on those sites that we do not have control over the distribution, the things that we value are not necessarily what drive algorithms. And that's a decision that is made by these companies. And, you know, a really great investigative piece of journalism that should require going beyond just the summary is not necessarily going to be the thing that drives a lot of clicks, but an outrageous opinion that says something that can be instantly shared all around the world is the kind of thing that is getting prioritized and it's being pushed. So that's part of the, you know, I'm not a big proponent of regulation. I think that there are dangers in that. However, we're in a dangerous space right now where there is good information is being squeezed out in this time of information warfare.
Yeah, Roman, do you want to build on that while also perhaps bringing in another question from our Slido, which might be instructive for this, which is from James, sorry, it's from an anonymous asker of, if AI doesn't care about truth, which is something that I think was just being talked about there, then it can only rely on user-generated content. How can news outlets survive when, frankly, the cost of and ease of using AI is 1,000 times lower?
Oh yes, this is a very interesting question, and I would like to say some remarks about the subject, because maybe you don't know that 80% of people in the Western countries say that their first source of everyday news are social platforms, not legacy media, social platforms. The second remarks. Between 20 or 30 content generated right now by AI on internet, of course, are so-called lunatic information. This is disinformation, fake news, and lies. because the LLM are learning on text. Some texts are true, some texts are not true, and they are using these lies as a normal information. This is a big problem. We can do as a journalist, as WAN-IFRA, for example. We organized the last World Congress in Krakow, WAN-IFRA. As an organization like Lina, Gazeta Wyborcza is a part of this organization. Lina is a leading European newspaper alliance with Die Welt, Le Figaro, La Repubblica, Le Soir, El País, etc. So we, as a journalistic world, we should do and we will do maybe better job, but we need support from government. And we talk a lot about the regulation. But what is crucial from my perspective? I'm a historian. I'm a teacher of history, but I worked 30 years as a journalist, and I remember the world without social platforms and internet. It was a long time ago. But we need education. Education at elementary school, from first class to secondary school, even at university, about media literacy. Really, this is the job and task for government. Maybe you know that Finland has a very fruitful media literacy project at elementary school. Elementary school. This is crucial. We can do everything what we should do and have to do, but without education, the situation like that we will face more and more AI-generated information, disinformation, fake news, etc. It will be like, you know, Don Quixotism. Yes, really. This is crazy. Education is crucial.
And that's interesting. Liz, I maybe want to ask you to build on that in light of another question that we have from the Slido, which is, or a couple actually. One is social media is predominantly utilized by young people who get their information from these platforms. So how dangerous is that to the future of politics? But then there was also another question that I think might be useful to kind of take us into the last 10 minutes or so of discussion, which is what can people actively do to actually protect themselves from this? How can they protect access to information? We've had Roman talk a little bit about the need for education here, but given the generational demographic stuff going on here, how do we find a way forward in a very confused information space?
Yeah, I think certainly public service media in their remit to serve everybody has had for many years now a really strong focus on serving all audiences and working out with all of the data that you can now get from your content online and on social media, understanding who your audience is and who you're missing and reaching out to those. So young audiences have always been a problem in terms of their use of news media, and reaching them is incredibly difficult. But there's been also some great success stories across public media, but also private media, to do some really innovative things on different platforms to reach audiences where they are. But in terms of, I wanted to perhaps give a couple of really positive examples of AI, because what we haven't talked about on this panel yet is how AI can really help the media in terms of our workflows and in terms of reaching those audiences. One of the questions before, there's lots of questions naturally about the impact on democracy, and really that's what we care the most about. I want to give you an example from Radio France. They had an interview at lunchtime with their Prime Minister. And between 9 and 10 a.m. every morning on all of the local radio stations across France, they have a phone-in. And they use that phone-in programme across all the local radio stations to say, if you were talking to the Prime Minister, what would you ask? What would your questions be? And they put that audio through an AI engine, from all of the local radio stations, 1 hour of audio, so 20 hours of audio, ran it through the AI and got it to summarize what the common themes were, and it helped them inform their interview with the Prime Minister at lunchtime. And there is no way that any human or any group of humans could have listened to 20 hours of audio in 2 hours to be able to produce that interview and to accurately reflect what the public was wanting to ask the Prime Minister. So there are many, many tools. We're also seeing introduction. We at the EBU have developed a news assistant, a chatbot, where you can interrogate only the information within your organisation. So your audience can, Swedish Radio have used this and others are going to start using it as well, where you can just say, Swedish Radio, what do you tell me about what's happening in Iran or what's happening in Gaza or what's happening in Ukraine? And it will interrogate only the information in that safe space and give you an answer in a conversational tone. You can have a conversation with it. So AI is really going to change how we interact with our audiences, how we deliver the news, and that's, I think, a really positive thing. And it comes back to the point you were making, is that we can't fight the new problem with the old technology, and I completely agree. And we have many, many opportunities for using AI for good.
Yeah, and what's interesting there, and just to flag, as we approach our kind of last 5 minutes, I think we will have a microphone that can kind of come around. So if anybody has any questions that they want to ask from the audience, please do stick up your hands, and we'll maybe try and pick up the pace a little bit. But Dritan, Liz there talked about the use of the tech stack, and I know that with what you're doing in EBU, that is internally done. But a lot of these AI systems are US-based, and they are often replicating those kind of Silicon Valley dominances that we have. There was a question here, I think, which was more about social media from the Slido, but why are there no European social media platforms of scale as alternatives to big American tech? I guess we could widen that out to AI as well. And as someone who's worked in this space, why do you think that is?
Well, I think in Europe, you have a phenomenon of over-regulation, which then stifles European innovation, and that's why you don't have this European-led products. And it's unfortunate because this technology will develop in the United States, in China, elsewhere, and whether it's AI or social media, it sips like water through the cracks. It comes back. So you need guardrails, and you need enforcement, and you need clear consequences for the misuse of these technologies. But that is more effective on the back end than it really is on the front end. If you overregulate on the front end, you take away the oxygen that's required for the environment to work. I will say one thing. The premise of one of the questions that was asked, AI doesn't care about the truth, is wrong. AI reflects the person that builds it. The philosophers of the future will ride in zeros and ones. And actually, the beauty about AI is that you don't really need to understand how to write in code, because its language is English, Polish, Albanian, Georgian, any language. I challenge the youth in this audience and other people to actually leverage AI to build the tools of the future, to check on whether something is real, on whether something is not, because it's much easier than people think. And it's not about who's building the large language models in Silicon Valley or elsewhere. They're making investments in data centers and in supercomputers. The way that AI functions is through something called RAG models, Retrieval Augmented Generation models. Anyone can train them. If you use OpenAI on a data set, my data set as a pollster around this research, it will only have 20% accuracy. But if I have one of my analysts spend a day or more training one of these models to read it accurately, he could read it with 95% accuracy. So that goes to show how the power in the age of AI is in the hands of every individual. And again, instead of fighting it, we have to co-opt it. And enough people of goodwill have to leverage it so that it can countermand the misuse of AI from people who do not have goodwill.
Roman, briefly?
Yeah, I'm very disappointed that we have our European social platform, but the one thing, of course, is over-regulating our market, but the second one is very effective lobbying from, for example, Google. Google, official from Google, came for decades to Warsaw, to Berlin, to Paris, and say, you don't need new social platform. We deliver you everything. What do you need? And this is the problem. But if you talk about the European AI startups or very big success, if we talk about this market, we have the success like that. For example, 11 Lab. This is a very interesting company created by Polish people. Right now, this company is in American hands because the owner of this company is one of the, I think, American found. So yeah, this is the problem, that some of very good specialists, very good, interesting scientists, if we talk about the AI, we lose these people to America.
Yeah.
Interesting. Beata, just in a sort of 30 seconds.
Yeah, just in response, but AI is not only used by philosophers and good-willed thinkers. And again, there is a disbalance between what it does when powers and governments are using AI. And one last thought, but we haven't really talked much about one of the most important role of journalism and its controlling power, and it's the watchdog role. And that watchdog role also involves basically controlling tech firms, and that's what they really resist. Also, the AI can do so many things, but unless journalists are empowered and protected from all the harmful effects, their ability to control powers will be weakened, and the power will always use technological advances to weaken that ability of journalists to control them.
Indeed. Stephen, I want to ask you to maybe just wrap us up a little bit, hopefully positively. Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty since 1949. Clue is in the name. Liberty and free Europe. Yep. Journalism's gone through a lot of challenges in the past. Can we overcome this one?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we play a vital role. There have been any number of different challenges through the years, but these are very powerful tools. We're seeing Russia in particular spending billions trying to, we talked about working the models, putting in good information in, getting the models to evaluate information. Russia's spending a tremendous amount of money to put bad information, using bots and everything to try to affect these models. When we talked before about joining forces with like-minded people who want to get it right, we have to figure out a way to make sure that accurate information is also being fed into these models, that keep our information flow into these systems, these very powerful tools, that our information is a part of this landscape. And if that happens, then I do think there is a very bright future.
Indeed. Well, look, one thing I think that we can take from this is that we're not exactly ignoring this problem. We are trying to come up with solutions, even if it is incredibly difficult. Just to flag, so we have now a 30-minute coffee break served in the lobby, but please do join us back here in this room for 11:10 for the last debate on the Schwarzenberg stage at this conference, which is going to be on Brazil's Blue Amazon. But before we all get our coffees and start to think about how we're going to solve the world's problems, please do give a hand to all of our audience members and our panelists here.
you. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage Admiral Da Silva.
It's working? Okay. And I'm glad to return to this beautiful country and this amazing city, Prague. I'd like to thank the organizers of GlobalSec for the invitation and the Konrad Adenauer Foundation for making my participation in this event possible. I understand that many people in Europe think that Brazil is geographically very far from Europe. But we are historically linked to Europe through the oceans. It's interesting to highlight, for instance, as an example, that recent research in the DNA of the Brazilian people, the Brazilian population, showed that Brazil is probably the country with the greatest genetic diversity in the world. But amazing that around 60% of the Brazilian population has European heritage. And even more, we are linked to Europe by important values as democracy, human rights, and the rule of law. At this 50 minutes, I'm going to defend the growing importance of the ocean, and I'm going to talk a little bit about how Brazil sees the ocean and this concept of Blue Amazon. The 21st century presents three main trends related to the oceans. The first is the immense importance of the oceans politically, geopolitically, economic, and environmental, and military and defense. The second trend is the challenge and tensions, increasing tensions from the demarcation of the state's maritime borders according to the law of the sea. And the third trend is the increase in tensions in the oceans caused by the competition between the United States and China that was formally declared in the US National Strategy in 2017 in the first Trump administration. So we see that great powers collaborate to sustain a globalized maritime system, but at the same time, they compete with others, bring tensions to the oceans. This dynamic reaffirms the assertion of that the oceans are always historically a domain of cooperation and conflict. And what is the importance of the oceans for humanity? Covering almost 3/4 of our planet, they play a crucial role in mitigating the impact of global warming and providing vital resources such as minerals, energy, and protein for over 3 billion individuals worldwide. Also, as highlighted by the United Nations, maritime transport is the backbone of international trade and the global economy. Over 80% of the volume of international trade in goods is carried by sea. 8%. 80%. But more important, that sometimes we don't pay attention. If maritime transport constitutes the backbone of global trade, then the submarine cables represents the backbone of international global data and voice communications. Employing fiber optic technology, these cables care much more, I think that's, they carry much more information than satellites, accounting for, imagine, 99% of international trade and communication is using submarine cables. We use our cell phones, but we don't have the idea that the message that we are sending is by submarine cables. So the importance of the oceans makes that the states try to increase its sea power. And what we can define it? Sea power is the ability of the state's ability to use the sea and influence the range of political, environmental, scientific and technological, security and defense activities related to the oceans. A state's sea power includes what's known as a blue economy, which is deeply linked with the advancement in science and technology. The economic dimension, or the importance, the economic dimension of maritime space bears significant implication for security and defense. All states need to protect their interests at sea, locally or regionally. And for those states that aspire to be great powers, is indispensable the capacity to develop global military operations to project influence globally, as we see now with this hegemonic dispute between United States and China. And what about Brazil? I see that the slides, the first slide is still projected. Brazil is a continental country with an immense land area. Brazil is the fifth largest country in the world. So, since the colonial times, Brazilian national identity was shaped by the need to occupy and integrate this continental part of the country. And the sea, the importance of the sea, was forgotten. Thus, in 2004, the commander of the Brazilian Navy wrote an article in a prestigious newspaper. The title was Blue Amazon. Blue Amazon, because everybody knows the Amazon. Even Jeff Bezos took the name to call his company that Amazon. So, but the idea was in this article was to say, okay, Brazilians, we are a continental, we have a continental territory with all these things, but we have another part of the country. Let me see here. Is it this way? No. Okay. Next. No. No. Here. But we have this immense and blue Amazon. You can see this, the blue area. This is 5.7 millions of kilometers, square kilometers. And this, all this area is that Brazil has due to the law of the sea, is economic zone, and all the area, it's the blue Amazon. The title, Blue Amazon, draws a deliberate parallel to the Green Amazon, underscoring the maritime region's rich biodiversity, abundant natural resource, and the critical role for the Brazilian economy to convince the Brazilian population of the importance of the sea. You see some data. 90% of Brazil's foreign trade is carried out by sea. 97 oil gas produced offshore. The company is producing oil at 7,000 meters depth. So, to say to the population, the Brazilian population, let's see how. Next one. Oh, okay. The Brazilian population, 212 million people. That the importance, and here in the small table we can see the quantities in millions of descendants coming from the other regions, especially from Europe. We have 60 million Portuguese descendants, 35 Italian, 15 Spanish, 5,000 Germans, 500,000 Czechs, 1 point, and so we are very multicultural and multiracial country. By invoking this analogy between the Green Amazon and the Blue Amazon, the Brazilian Navy intended to promote public awareness and national pride in Brazil's immense oceanic wealth, emphasize the importance of the economic development, environmental conservation, and national security. In addition to the Blue Amazon, Brazil's national defense policy considers the South Atlantic, that is all the area that that goes to Africa, considers the South Atlantic as a priority area for Brazil, We have excellent relations with two brother countries, Argentina and Uruguay, with whom we share interests in the South Atlantic, including the South Atlantic Peace and Cooperation Zone that was established in 1986 in the United Nations with the aim of promoting regional cooperation and maintaining peace and security around the 24 of South Americans and West Coast of Africa countries that joined the mechanism. So for us, we don't want that this competition, the militarization that we see in several regions of the world. We have this free of nuclear weapons area. We don't like to see this competition, these tensions arising in our area. In conclusion, the oceans are becoming increasingly important on the international stage, both as an environment for cooperation and a source of tensions and conflict. At this time of so much tensions and war, one of Brazil's main objectives is to contribute to ensure that the South Atlantic remains a zone of peace and cooperation in accordance with our Constitution, which has at its fundamental principles the peaceful resolution of disputes and cooperation between peoples for the progress of humanity. Thank you very much.
Admiral Silva, thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a wrap from the Schwarzenberg stage. This is it. We have gone from Arctic security to the Blue Amazon and back again. We have covered Ukrainian reconstruction, radicalization of politics, and so on. To me, the Schwarzenberg room has been the best room, mainly because you're allowed to have a quick nap in here. I see that this was a Czech joke. Those who knows it, knows it. Anyway, no time for napping now, because we have still two things going on at the Havel stage, where we're going to go now. First of all, maybe the most pertinent panel still left about the Middle East peace puzzle. Maybe we should call it a war puzzle now. And then finally, a chat with the Czech Interior Minister Vít Rakušan about resilience, which is an area where the Czech Republic is basically world champions. So, guys, over to the Havel stage. Thank you very much.